series, a new one called Mind Blown. And I don't know if you guys deal with emojis, but there's this emoji, and on the background, I guess, or the slide for the sermon series, you have that emoji where someone looks like someone's brain has exploded. And that's the title of our sermon series, and it's going to be an 8-week sermon series, which goes through the Beatitudes that Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapter 5. So we're going to be covering these 12 verses, which Jesus has this famous sermon, and they call it the Sermon on the Mount. And it's a number of different teaching points, a number of things, Beatitudes and all sorts of different things. It's like, if I would ever if that was a single sermon, you guys would be here all day and be like, oh, I mean, it's the next topic and the next topic, and nothing seems to be related. And so, but we're going to be covering that. We're just going to be focusing on the Beatitudes section, so the first 12 verses of chapter 5. And as I prepared and read over this sermon series, there were some things that came to me that I never experienced before. Like, I honestly, I've read through the Beatitudes multiple times, and I never really studied deep within it to prepare for like a sermon series. And so, but in doing so, I saw some things that jumped out at me. So hopefully I am going to enlighten you a little bit. Or maybe you're like, I already knew that, Zach. You're way behind. Maybe, who knows? But for instance, as you read the first two passages, some Bible scholars believe that actually this teaching that Jesus was doing was actually probably not done to a large crowd. When you think of Sermon on the Mount, you think of, there's famous paintings of Jesus sitting on a rock next to a big cliff, and you see all these people that are kind of surrounding Jesus, and so in my mind, I always figured that Jesus was standing on this mountain and preaching this massive Billy Graham sermon type of thing over all these crowds, and people were receiving this message from Jesus. But if you look at this passage, it says, one day as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered around him and began to teach them. His disciples gathered around him and he began to teach them. So as I used to look at this text, as I said, I thought Jesus, just looking at the paintings of this and kind of going based on that in my reading of the scripture, I thought Jesus saw a large crowd coming, saw a mountainside, which by the way is a big hill. Okay, it's not like Colorado Rocky Mountains. Okay, he didn't go up like an elevation of 1,000 feet to speak over them. It's a big hill. Like at the bottom of even Thrill Hill is probably bigger than like what if you're looking at this the right way. And so, but Jesus, I thought he just kind of climbed up so that he could then project himself and everyone could see him and see his mouth moving and see his hand motions, kind of like I'm up here above you guys. Not that I'm better or anything, but so that you can see me clearly. If you're in the back row and I was standing on the ground, you wouldn't be able to see me if people are taller in front of you. But being up here on stage, you can all see me. So if that's kind of how my mind surrounded this Sermon on the Mount as I came into this. But if you look at chapter 4, verses 23 through 25, right before Matthew starts writing the Sermon on the Mount section, it talks about specifically all the large crowds that had been gathering around Jesus, and that Jesus was meeting all of their needs. And I thought that was quite interesting for Matthew to end chapter 4 talking about the large crowds, and that Jesus was constantly being surrounded by large crowds, and he met every single one of their needs. Okay? So as I read that, and then you move into chapter 5, then it goes back again, it says, they saw a large crowd gathering, and then Jesus went up onto the mountainside. And he sat down, and his disciples gathered around him, and he began to teach them. To me, as I read that, it says, notice he sat down. Now, in the Jewish culture, if you're going to teach, it's always done standing up. Okay? It's always done standing up and never sitting down. So to me, as I read into this and kind of did some studying on this, it seems to me that, and many scholars believe that Jesus was not teaching a large crowd. That Jesus was just specifically teaching his disciples. So when I read, so as you read into this and Jesus slips, it's almost like, and I know that you guys have all experienced this and you're all going to giggle and maybe not want to admit it, but it's almost like Jesus saw the big crowd coming and he was like, oh no. And he went and hid. He's like, not today. I can't do this. And all of you have experienced that there's somebody that has bothered you, you're not in the mood, and someone that bothers you, and you're like, not today. I can't handle this today. I can't handle this. I can't be like Jesus today. I'm not answering this phone right now. I don't have the mental capacity to handle what you want from me right now, and so I'm gonna slip away, maybe not answer the door, and you hide, and or you see that person coming, and you're like, spin move. And you hide and you go away, shut the door, or whatever. You just don't have the mental capacity to help it. And it's even been even easier to do that now with cell phones because you just hit that deny button. Or just let the phone ring and caller ID and don't deny it. Every single one of you have done that. But I feel like that's what Jesus was doing. I think Jesus saw the crowds gathering and he goes, you know what? I just don't have it in me right now. I have something else that's more important. And so Jesus slips up into the mountain, which again is just way up into a hill, and I'm sure there were trees surrounding this, and so Jesus went up into the mountain and preached this message to his disciples. Now, scholars also believe that this was not just a one and done sermon. Okay, the Sermon on the Mount, it's so many points that are all over the map. That there's no way that they were able to retain all of that to just one long sermon. So they believe that Jesus probably escaped up onto the mountain with his original 12 disciples and maybe some other close people, and they went up there for maybe a week or even longer. And these are all of the stories that Jesus taught them. These are all of them put together, all of these messages that Jesus taught them during this time. So it's almost like the disciples took a little mini retreat. A mini retreat to get away from all of the hustle and bustle of what Jesus is doing and all the people that are following so that Jesus could get to a secluded place and teach his disciples a crash course of what it meant to be a follower of him, a follower of God's. And the Sermon on the Mount was a record of this teaching time. And so to me that makes a way more sense than this long, extensive sermon that Jesus gave for everyone to hear. There's this past December, Megan and I took our kids to Florida, and some of you were here when I was the interim still, and we went to Florida, and while we were there, we decided, I can't be in Orlando and not do Disney because we are like Disney people, Megan and I, and our kids are very much Disney people, and we knew that with all the restrictions, COVID restrictions and stuff, it wasn't going to be as fun, and they had certain things that made it more difficult to enjoy. But we were like, yeah, let's just do it anyway, and we're down here. And so we went to one of the new parks, not newer parks, but a park that has a bunch of new rides that our kids have never experienced. But one in particular ride that Megan and I have gotten to ride, but our children have not, and it's called Rise of the Resistance, a Star Wars ride. It's probably one of the most popular rides. And it makes you feel, if you're a Star Wars fan, it makes you feel like you're on a battleship in outer space and you're running, you're like Luke Skywalker running away from the stormtroopers and stuff. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so Megan and I have been talking about this ride to our kids. We introduced Star Wars to our kids. Our kids love Star Wars, and we're like, they got to ride this ride. They got to ride this ride. We went to this park specifically to ride this one ride. Well, Disney has this new process to get onto this one ride where at 7 in the morning you have to get on your phone and you have to join, it's called a boarding group. You have to join a boarding group. And so you have to get on your phone and press refresh that you get on this boarding group. Guess what? It was gone in 40 seconds. So I got up at 7 o'clock pushing refresh, and it pops up like, oh, here you go. And then I went to go push on it, and it's like, sorry, not there. Refresh. Anyway, so Megan and I are like, oh, well, we didn't get on it, but we got to go. And so I'm there, and I'm pouting, and they open up again at 1 o'clock. They open it up again at 1 o'clock because they want to make sure there's not too many people. They don't want people in line all day to ride this ride because some people would stay there for 6 hours. I would have been one of them to sit 6 hours to ride this ride because it's that good. Well, so 1 o'clock comes around, and we rode a lot of rides. We were having a good time, and I was hopeful this was going to happen. The kids were like, are we going to get to ride this ride? I'm like, I hope so. And I'm carrying all this weight of us riding this ride on my shoulders, like, this is it. This is why we were here. This is what we were here for. I paid this much money for us to ride this ride, for my kids to experience this ride. And 1 o'clock comes around, I'm sitting in line going, refresh. Megan's got her phone out. Refresh. Gone in 30 seconds. And we didn't get on. We didn't get it. So I went to the Disney kiosk and I went and talked to people and I wrote an email and made some phone calls and sure enough, we got our tickets paid for. Disney paid for our tickets. Disney got us on the ride that night. And no, that's a lie. Didn't even respond. The happiest place on earth. Didn't even respond. All that much money. And me trying to explain to these people, I paid just to ride this one ride. And my kids were disappointed. Meg and I were disappointed. And we were really sad. And I was really expecting Disney to, normally they're very, very good at hospitality, but not today. Or for anybody who misses this ride. So I was kind of experiencing sour grapes that whole day. And I really felt like, what a bummer. And it wasn't towards the end of that day that I realized that, wow, I have allowed this one circumstance that I didn't get on this one ride. But guess what? We got on to every single ride and rode them multiple times. Because the park wasn't that full. We got to ride every single ride. My son got to ride one of these flip rides. Tons and tons of stuff. For one of his first indoor flip rides. He loved it, and it was an awesome experience. And my kids absolutely loved it. Were they disappointed not getting on the Star Wars ride? Yes, but they got to get on this, and they absolutely had a great day. But my focus was on this outward circumstance that we didn't get on the ride that we all wanted to, and I allowed it to affect my happiness and my joy that day. And God kind of reminded me as we were walking out of the park as the kids were happy and excited about the day and they were tired, and it was a great experience that my happiness does not depend on external circumstances, that I had missed this opportunity, this joyful opportunity because of some external circumstance had ruined my attitude, that I had missed the joy that I had spending this time with my kids, riding these great rides and this experience with them. I'd miss it because I was so frustrated that I didn't get this one experience that I was longing for. And it really ruined it and created kind of a downer for me and kind of a dark blanket over what would be a great day. And who knows if we ever will get to experience that together as a family again. And God reminded me of this, and happiness rises and falls, but blessedness is a kind of happiness that remains steady in spite of the variations in feelings. Jesus tells us that happiness is found in the opposite direction of what men and women look for in our world. Okay? True happiness. Okay? I was trying to find true happiness in the fulfillment of my desire that my kids get to experience this, and because that's where I was looking for it, I was left disappointed. But God's happiness is an all-encompassing happiness. It's a blessedness. I was blessed to be with my kids and have an opportunity to be at Disney World with my kids. Get the difference? And that's what God is reminding us in this passage. It seems that to the world, that's nonsense, though. To the world, that's nonsense. It's almost this idea of what God says is what true happiness comes from is total nonsense to the world because they think, oh no, happiness comes from self-gratification. When all of your things that you want are gratified and you get what you want, that's where happiness is. And that's what the world tells you. But God says, no. Real happiness comes from the blessedness of the life that I've given you, the blessedness of what you've experienced through me. And that's exactly what the Beatitudes of Christ that we're going to be studying here the next couple of weeks is about. The Beatitudes of Jesus are the true, authentic attitudes that God desires from His followers. It's the correct attitude and mindset that truly bring a smile to God's face. So it's really important that we understand these and we can kind of shape our minds around what God desires as we think of the Beatitudes, what our attitudes should be. Okay, that's kind of a play on words. Our attitudes should be. Many people speak highly of the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, but I don't truly believe they understand or are aware of the radical nature of what Jesus is saying in these teachings. And they're truly radical. If you compare them to what the world teaches us and what the world tells us is truth, they're very radical. And that's why I called this sermon series Mind Blown, because when you understand what God desires, it will blow your mind. It will blow your mind, and you'll think, wow, that's completely different from how I was raised in this world. And what this world has told me is how you live your life, because God's ways are so much different from what the world says is the way you live your life, and it will blow your mind. Okay, verse 3. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for Him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. The proper translation for this text is that we read in English was translated Greek into Greek, from Greek to English for us. But even before that, Jesus spoke it in Aramaic with hints of Hebrew within it. And so a translation of a different one says, "Oh, the blessedness of being poor in spirit." And that's important for us to understand that we know the true meanings of what Jesus is saying here, because as I read through that, there's a lot of different things that as I read that, I'm like, what exactly is Jesus trying to tell us here? And there are words that we read in English that puts those English definitions in our mind, but really that's not what Jesus is saying whenever He uses those words. It's just a lot of things have been translated differently, and we have to know what Jesus actually is meaning, and when He says the word like poor. Okay? Because when I read that, a lot of times I see that and I'm like, oh, Jesus, you're blessed if you're poor. Okay, you're blessed if you're poor. And that's actually not what Jesus is saying there. We're going to get into that. But in effect, if you read this, what Jesus is actually saying as I get into this, it says, oh, the blessings of being a believer. Okay, so this is what Jesus actually, the blessing of being a believer, the joy of following Christ, the happiness of knowing Jesus Christ as Master and our Savior and our Lord. The greatness of the Beatitudes as we read through this is that it's not just a wishful glimpse of some future beauty that's going to be coming, but it's the triumphal shouts of delight for the permanent joy that nothing in this world can ever take away. That these Beatitudes, these promises, are things that we can utilize now as believers. Today, we can utilize these in our life. It's not something that's going to be coming to us. It's something that we can tap into today as followers of Jesus. It seems very surprising to me that as Jesus opens up this text on, how to find fulfillment and happiness in Christ, He starts with, "Blessed are those who are poor." Kind of an odd way to talk about happiness, because when we think about poor, we think, oh, you must be unhappy. You're poor. Okay, you don't have the resources in life. You must be unhappy. And Jesus starts with poor. And again, as I said, it's very important for us to understand what Jesus is saying here when He uses that word poor. And He's not talking about finances whatsoever. The best translation, again, which Jesus spoke this in probably Aramaic, with roots in Hebrew again, and He's not talking about wealth or income whatsoever. Jesus does not say, may they be blessed, the poor. He's not saying those poor unfortunate souls out there, may they be blessed. As we might see somebody that's poor, maybe you see somebody, someone begging, and you might see them, you're like, oh, that poor soul. That's not what Jesus is telling us to, not like an attitude for us to have for somebody, or to feel sorry for the poor. That's not what Jesus is saying. And we should, by the way, feel sorry for the poor and to bless them. I just want to make sure you're not reading what I'm saying differently or hearing it differently. We should do that, but that's not what Jesus is trying to say here. That's not the point that He's trying to make. We should see the poor and feel sorry for them and do something to bless their lives. Jesus clearly states that, but that's not His point that He's making right here. Jesus is also not saying that those who have no money are blessed. He's also not saying that as well, because Jesus does mention that it's harder to get into heaven. If a rich person, it's very hard for a rich person to get into heaven. He says it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle, the little hole on a needle. It's easier to put a camel through that than for a rich man to get into heaven. But he's not saying, blessed are those that are poor because you don't have any money, you don't have to worry about all that stuff. He's not saying that as well. He is not saying, blessed are those who have no resources and have to beg for their next meal. No, and if this were the case, Jesus wouldn't have told countless times throughout the Gospels to sell your stuff and give it to the poor. Okay? Multiple times Jesus said, sell your stuff and give it to the poor and needy, because if you were a blessed person for being poor and needy, then wouldn't Jesus want you to stay poor and needy? Right? If you're blessed for being poor and needy, wouldn't he want to keep you in that circumstance? So why would Jesus then tell people to go and give all your possessions to the poor? The reason why Jesus said that was because he wanted people to get out of that bad circumstances that they were in. He wanted good people that had resources to help others be pulled out of that bad circumstance so they could experience. That's why Jesus went around and healed beggars. Okay? He physically would touch their body so that they can go and escape. They could escape the physical limitations that they have so they could go and make a life for themselves and not be in that current circumstance. So what Jesus isn't saying is, blessed are those that are poor. He's not saying that. Poor physically or financially. Okay? So well, then what does Jesus mean then by the word poor? Jesus is referring to the poverty of the Spirit. Poverty of the Spirit. Jesus is describing those who are humble and helpless, that put their whole trust in God. Okay? So those that are poor in spirit, what Jesus is saying is those who understand they can't live this life successfully, that they don't have the resources in their life, and so they've said, I am totally going to be dependent on God. That's where I'm poor in. I don't have what it takes to live this life successfully for Jesus, and so I am surrendering over to God. I'm totally dependent on God to control and to help me in this. And so those are the people that Jesus is saying, you are blessed when you live that way. When you have detached from all the materialistic things in this life and surrendered your dependency on God. Why? Why would people do that? And again, remember I said mind blown? That's not something that this world teaches us. Mind blown. They know that the people that do this, the poor in spirit, they know that the things in this world do not have the power to bring lasting happiness or security. No matter how many times I take my place to the happiest place on earth, there are multiple times that I'm not going to be happy there. Multiple things that are going to happen at Disney World that are going to cause me not to be happy. Whether it's my kids jumping off of something, climbing over something, and my kids doing something, or Disney not satisfying my desires, or bad food, or whatever, or someone else, there's going to be some sort of unhappiness that happens in there that this world does not provide. And so they will become completely attached to God versus attached to the world, in hopes that God alone, knowing that God alone can bring them the help, the hope, and the strength that they need to run this race of life. When people realize their own inability and their own lack of resources to successfully navigate through this life, they find their help and strength in God alone. And that's what it means to be poor in spirit. That's what Jesus is saying there. Blessed are those that are poor in spirit, those that have detached themselves from this world and said that this world cannot give me the things that I need to finish this race, this spiritual race that God has set me on. It just cannot offer me what I need, but only Christ alone, only God alone. When I attach my life to Him and become utterly dependent on Him, can I run this race of life. That is what Jesus means by talking about being poor in spirit. But, unfortunately, we are taught completely the opposite. We are taught completely the opposite. That in our lives, it is you work your whole life. You work to be self-sufficient. You work to provide for yourself. You work to provide for your family. It's our job and our responsibility as we grow up to learn to be sufficient and to take care of yourself. And if you can take care of yourself and even have the ability to take care of family and stuff, you are a successful human being. That's how we're taught. That's how we're taught and we're raised. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that mindset and that teaching. I mean, I graduated college. When I graduated college, I had a job lined out, a full-time job lined out before I graduated, so that I knew that as soon as I graduated, I could move and have that job. And I knew I wanted to get married to my wife, and so I knew I had to have a job. And so when I got out of college, I was ready to get married, which we did shortly after, and I had a job ready to move into. And I was so proud of myself. I was so proud of myself, feeling like, yes, I didn't have to move back in with my folks. Yes, I did it. They prepared me, and I was ready, and I did what I needed to do. I was self-sufficient. I felt so proud of myself, scared to death, but proud of myself that I was able to do that. And again, there's nothing wrong with having that type of desire and that teaching in our life, but Jesus gives us a warning of a curse that comes with that type of mindset that will infiltrate your spiritual life. That when we have a failure to recognize our true deficiency to be successful spiritually in this life, it will lead to pride and destruction. When we let that mindset of I'm going to be self-sufficient in my life and provide for my family and take care of those, if we let that infiltrate our spiritual walk, we will fail miserably. Because there is nothing that you and I can do on our own back and our own strength that we can run this race of life successfully. The spiritual race of life. It's impossible. It's impossible. And so if we let that mindset of, I can take care of my family, I can create this opportunities for my family and be self-sufficient, if we let that infiltrate us spiritually, it will bring a curse of pride and destruction into our life. Because the only way we can successfully run this race, if we detach ourselves and allow Jesus to have every ounce of us. If we just say, I can't do it, I surrender, may you give me the strength I need, lead me in this race. What's amazing is he gladly does that. He gladly does that, openly receives us. I think about all of the disciples that detached themselves. I think of Peter, James, and John who left the fishing nets to follow Christ, and Matthew who stopped tax collecting, and Zacchaeus who was willing to sell all of his wealth in order to follow Jesus and to be one of his followers, and Paul who suffered great things and great losses and left all of his status and left all of his finances and resources, everything that he accumulated in order to detach himself to follow Jesus, because they all realized that this life, no matter how successful you could be, does not matter. What matters is the spiritual race that we're on and finishing it successfully. And they all understood that they can't do it attached to the world. They can only do it detached into being dependent on God. And I think of the rich young ruler. You remember that story in Matthew 19 where he came to Jesus and he knew all of the answers and he had done all the things, and Jesus says, come and sell all of your possessions and follow me. And he left sad because he had so much wealth and he couldn't detach himself from this world. He couldn't detach himself and become dependent on Christ. We have to recognize our inability to overcome these obstacles and to break away from it. Remember the sin, I'm going to close up here. Remember the sin in the garden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Remember that? And what the serpent told him that it would provide, it would give you the knowledge and the wisdom of God, meaning that you could be your own God. That you no longer need to be dependent on God in life. That you will have all of the knowledge of God and you can be dependent on yourself. You can become your own God. That was the selling point. That was the first original sin. And that's what we do a lot. We think we can become sufficient on our own abilities. We can control our own destiny. We think, hey, I know what I need in my life. I know what it's going to take to live this life the right way. And that's baloney. That's baloney. Because what God has planned for us may not be what we think is right. And what we think is right might not be good for our lives. I love the movie, and I'm closer. You guys can head up, please. I love the movie Bruce Almighty. It's not super old, but the movie Bruce Almighty, where if you have not seen this movie, he's complaining constantly about God, the cards that he's been dealt, that this guy, Bruce's life, and he feels like God has cursed him, that God is not, he's blessing everyone else but Bruce, and so he complains and complains and complains, and he prays and he curses God. He says, you're a terrible God. If I had your ability. I would do things the right way. And so God shows up in Morgan Freeman, as Morgan Freeman. And he shows up and he tells Bruce, "Well, fine. You think you can do better? Here's the keys to the car. You can be God. So he gives Bruce the ability to be God. And Bruce does a bunch of funny different things. And he there's a soup bowl that's tomato soup, and he parts the soup bowl like the Red Sea, and does all sorts of funny things. And so he kind of plays God, but he really doesn't do anything. But then all of a sudden, all the prayers come, and he starts freaking out, and he just says, "Everybody gets what they want. Everyone gets what they want," and the world goes crazy. Everyone everyone wins the lottery because everyone prays for the lottery, and Bruce gave everyone what they wanted, so everyone won like a penny or a dollar because everyone won it. And the world is going chaotic because there's madness, because everyone's getting what they want. And the thing that Bruce really wants is this girl in his life, and she leaves him because playing God and getting everything he wants in life has caused his morality to change, and it's caused him to not be a very good person. The person that he actually loves leaves him. And it's kind of this moment in his life of this world actually finally comes crashing down, and he understands things, and he falls on his knees on this road, and he says, I'm done. I surrender. He says, I'm done. I can't be you. I can't be God. I want you to decide what's right for my life. I surrender to your will. And I love that. And as I was thinking about what it means, what Jesus is saying here by blessed are the poor in spirit, this is what he's talking about. He says he desires the poor in spirit are those that surrender, that get on their knees. They get on their knees and they say, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I want what's right in my life. I want you to decide what's right in my life. I surrender to your will. I'm detaching myself from being in control. I'm detaching myself from the luxuries of this world so that I can follow you and be following you, and knowing that you have a great plan for my life, and knowing that you are going to do great things in my life. And I want to run this race successfully. I want to finish it. I want to help others. And the only way that can be done is if I am poor in spirit, that you have all of me. And so I pray that that's our call in our life. I pray that that's the desire in our hearts as we move forward in this race. And so we're going to sing this song, Ocean. And I pray that that's the desire in your heart. I pray that as we sing that, and you can stand with us as we sing that you, maybe you've been in control. Maybe you have held on the keys to your life for a long, long time. And Jesus is just saying right now, he's saying, will you stop? Will you just fall on your knees and say, I surrender, and become poor in spirit, which is what he desires. That's what he desires. Isn't that amazing that God isn't wanting us, he's not kicking us off on our own, like most parents. Go fend for yourself. You'll be fine. You got this. You'll figure it out. No, Jesus is saying, God's a much different parent. He says, no, I want you to be needy. I want you to need me. I want you to rely on me. I will give you everything that you need for the rest of your life so that you can run this race, so that we can be together one day in eternity. And so I want to give you everything that you need so that you can be as successful as you can be, and I can make you successful. So just detach yourself. Be dependent on me, and I will give you all that you need.